Hello, my name is Lucas, this is a bit of lit, and I'm here to talk about cryptography, the key to digital security, how it works, and why it matters, written by Keith Martin. I believe it was published last year, and it is a fantastic nonfiction book that I've read for Nonfiction November. I needed something that would try to provide me some kind of comfort in terms of security in cyberspace after reading The Hacker and the State, which was nothing but pure nightmare fuel. A very good book by Ben Buchanan, but utterly terrifying. So, anyway, I like two things about this book. Well, many things I like about this book. It makes cryptography extremely accessible because it is based around mathematics. If you don't understand math, Keith Martin does an excellent job of helping you understand it and giving you practical examples that aren't within cyberspace to explain some concepts that are used in cryptography. And he uses historical examples to explain plain text, hypertext, ciphertext, I mean, not hypertext, ciphertext, algorithms, keys, and that kind of thing. And those two things are key to cryptography. The algorithm, as he mentions, is the sort of engine room of cryptography. And the key is, well, the way you open the door, so to speak. He writes this in a way that I believe he says you don't need to be an armchair algebraist, so you don't really need to have an understanding of math beyond anything, I guess. He writes it in a very, very accessible way, which I really appreciate because it's been a while since I've used complex math. Certainly I have not used the kind of complex math necessarily involved with creating complex algorithms, for example. This book goes into great detail about all the things that need to be considered. And, you know, it talks about algorithms and what their function is and why they're important. And what's interesting is that some aspects of algorithms might seem counterintuitive. For example, when you are using a product or some kind of website or doing some kind of transaction or something, you want an algorithm that's no secret. Not a secret algorithm. You want something that can sort of be exposed to the public and scrutinized, because then you might think, well, wouldn't that make it more likely, if people know the algorithm, to find some way to get in? Certainly I was thinking that as I was reading this chapter, but actually, if it's secret, then he gives a really good example of a locksmith. You go to a locksmith and you ask for a secure lock, and he can explain all of his products and what they do and how the mechanisms work. And you can be convinced by that. But then you see on his shelf some Wunderlock or whatever, and you ask about it, and he says, well, I don't know how it works, which can cause some problems, because if the locksmith doesn't know how it works, but he's been guaranteed that it works really well by the company, well, if he doesn't know how it works, then no locksmith probably knows how it works. Who's to say that the guarantee is accurate? And then if somebody happens to break this, then it's extremely easy to just take everything, right? And, you know, there's a whole host of other issues. Whereas, for example, a accessible sort of algorithm can be scrutinized, so any kind of backdoors and this kind of thing can be understood and called out, and changes can be made. That's just one thing. There's all kinds of other really fascinating aspects to cryptography. I went on a lot about. One thing that he does really well is to provide other historical examples. Like, for example, when he's explaining ciphertext, he explains if you have a very simple kind of algorithm where you're exchanging, let's say you're going through the alphabet A, B, C, D, E, F, G to Z, and you're just flipping the alphabet, so it's Z, Y, X, W, V, U, U, V, oh God, V, U, whatever. I've never used the alphabet backwards in a long time. Anyway, I don't want to think about it anymore. That's embarrassing. This is actually quite simple and could be easy to recognize, especially if you have one sample of plain text, which is just the English, for example, the proper English, and then if you have the ciphertext, which is the coded cryptographic message, you can take a look at what the relationship is there and then easily crack the code. And he gives some examples of this kind of thing through history and how Caesar used cryptography very early on by changing the letters and the relationship by a couple of spaces. Napoleon also did this, though apparently Napoleon in his messages would write some parts of it, have some parts of it in French, proper French, and then some parts coded, which is just asking for trouble. Mary Queen of Scots, of course, used this as well, and the code was cracked, and manipulation happened there, and people could pretend they were somebody they weren't, and of course, the Enigma code and Alan Turing and all that in World War II is another example that Keith Martin uses to try to explain cryptography. Another really good part about this book is when it's talking about sort of the dangers and problems and risks and why it matters, as I said, and sort of the relationship the government has and companies as well with this kind of thing. There's this term called escrow. Escrow, according to my Kindle's definition, is a bond, deed, or other document kept in the custody of a third party, taking effect only when a specified condition has been fulfilled. In this case, the government would be the third party. If, say, I'm one party and you're another party, or maybe the company is another party. He brings up the case of Edward Snowden and his exposure of the NSA's tools for hacking and spying and this kind of thing, and how there's a lot of pushback against having this kind of encryption and cryptographic security when, especially by government officials, when certain things happen. San Bernardino case with the FBI and Apple, for example, there's some pushback on how should we have so much security and that kind of thing. Make it that what you will, but he goes into detail about this kind of thing. And he does a really good job of laying out the details there, and I think really, really puts things in perspective, and I really enjoy it. Anyway, I'm certainly still no expert on cryptography, but it was illuminating, and I'm happy that I read this book and look forward to reading more books about cryptography. And now I'm going to start reading about dark data, which I've actually read 80 pages of it so far, and it is horrifying as well. Thank you.